Imagine reading curated opinion pieces that aim to help us better understand policy and politics from the people closest to it, or sometimes people who want to be far from it. We offer political insights without the limit of column inches. Introducing Quotes by Air Quotes Media, creators of the Herle, Burley, and Curse of Politics podcasts, where we bring politics from the inside out. And now with Quotes, you can read from contributors like Jim Coyle, Jim Stanford, and Kathleen Wynne, with more to come. Read Quotes at airquotesmedia.com/quotes.
Greetings, you happily miserable accursed. Welcome to the only political podcast that strives mightily to put the cuss and discuss, as well as give you an ongoing update as to Kory Teneycke's wardrobe. I had predicted turtleneck today, but no, it's a different thing altogether. Always interesting. David Herle here with our ever-loving panel, Jordan Leichnitz, Scott Reid, and yes, Kory Teneycke, with a mimosa in hand of all things. Here's where we're going today. It was a rip-roaring last 7 days for the Prime Minister. We'll dive into all of it. The Trudeau Foundation, his video confrontation on abortion, Minister Lametti's comments, the Western Swing promoting the budget, and Katie Telford's appearance before the Commons Committee. Big week. Pierre Poilievre's upping the aggression, if you thought that was even possible. We'll look at his latest plays, his letter to David Johnston, and doubling down on attacks on the media defunding the CBC, and try to figure out what he's up to. What is he trying to do? Our cursed clipping this week is from Lisa Johnson at the Edmonton Journal on Danielle Smith refusing to allow follow-up questions from journalists at her pressers. And then, as always, the great Gordon Pinsent will herald our Hey Yous. Hey, team, how you doing?
Great.
All right.
I'm
not as good as Kory.
It's 9:05
clearly.
and I have a mimosa. I don't have any breakfast, but I have a mimosa. I'm at the Drake Devonshire in Prince Edward County en route back to Toronto this morning.
Well, that is lovely. I think we're all envious, Kory. Scott, you didn't reply quickly to whether you were well or not.
I'm one step ahead of the law, but I'm glad to see that Kory's in the county. That's my home stomping grounds. That's where I grew up. So swing by the Rossmore-Rendersville area. It's on the other side there, and you can look at the family home. I don't think there's a plaque up yet.
There's still time.
I drove in from the east side because I was coming from Montreal, but it is gorgeous down here. Like, it's just such a nice spot. If people haven't been down here before, it's really wonderful. And Sandbanks is sort of, you can't believe that it's actually Ontario. It was 28 degrees yesterday. 28, can you believe it? It's like 4 degrees today, but just spectacular summer weather, even though it's early spring.
Jordan,
in May and June.
Nothing weird about that at all.
May and June, we'd cut school and go to the Sandbanks and, drink beer out of a cooler, and I would get turned out by women, and well, that's the end of the story.
Good practice for lifelong experiences.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I got the
Everybody healthy at home, Jordan?
Oh, definitely not. No.
No.
No, my partner had COVID last week, and then I was maybe had it at some point, but wasn't testing positive, and weird sickness, and now it's my older little one's turn, and so we're just really excited to not be breathing indoor air with other people as soon as we can, because It has been a time, friends.
All right, Scott Reid, let's start. Trudeau's big week. I think it was a hell of an interesting week in a lot of respects, but let's start with Katie Telford's testimony before the committee on Friday. And, in previous lives, you would have been helping prepare somebody for such an appearance. How'd she do?
She did fine. Your fundamental goal, if you're her in this circumstance, is to have it be a non-event. And, if we were going to do 2 rounds on this, we would die, because there's not 2 rounds of things to say about her testimony. She was very solid, very competent. One small thing I'll just say for the media trainer in me, Katie has an easy smile. So the whole time she's testifying, the whole time she's being questioned, she's got, Michael Cooper, he looks like he robs graves. I one more thing to ask you. And she just smiles and leans in and sort of like, yeah, as I've explained, and then, he goes back to his cup of blood and she just kind of moves through the guy. So I thought she did well. I thought there was one, I've said this elsewhere, but I thought there was one interesting contrast, and that was the strategies at committee between the Conservatives and the NDP. The Conservatives kept trying to pull off this, Perry Mason moment, this sort of Matlock moment. You called the code red, you ordered the code red, admit it, and they wanted this drama, and that never happened, and Katie was not going to give them that. But the NDP just kept coming up, particularly Rachel Blaney, who I wasn't super familiar with. I thought she was very effective because while it doesn't get a lot of headlines, she just kept coming back to, I understand. Walk me through why you're not calling a public inquiry. Why the fuck aren't you calling a public inquiry? Wouldn't that just get rid of all these suspicions and cynicisms? Why aren't you calling a public inquiry again? And she was just as hard in many ways as the Conservatives. She'd jam them. She'd sort of do drive-bys in her question about how shitty the government is and how rotten all the people around the Prime Minister are. She would do all the digs. It wasn't all kid gloves or anything. But she just kept coming back to that common sense proposition of why not call a public inquiry, which I thought had more resonance than, on page 33 in paragraph 1, subparagraph 2, you admit that you are Satan's choice. Is that not right, Ms. Telford? And they would just kind of shrug it off. So I thought it was a non-event, and that's all that you can ask for if you're the PMO.
Yeah, so Kory, I think we can all agree that Telford put in a strong performance. What were the Conservatives hoping to get out of the committee? Were they hoping to get more than what they got? Or do you think they only ever expected what happened and that's good enough?
Well, I think they're trying to ask a lot of questions that they know from the outset that the government can't answer, that Telford can't answer because of confidentiality reasons around intelligence information, and to make it look like she's not providing answers and that there's some sort of cover-up going on. The Conservative members aren't dummies. They know that a lot of the questions they were answering were going to come back with blacked out information. So it's by intention. So I think that's it. But, I'll keep coming back to, I think this is an inside Ottawa story at this point, and with ever smaller political yields for the opposition. I think it's sucking up a lot of oxygen in the room for everyone, and that hurts the government too. Obviously, they're not talking about their agenda when they're talking about this. But do you know who else is not talking about their agenda? The opposition. And when you're scoring home run hits on the economy and cost of living, I don't know why you want to hit these, grounders and base hits on Chinese political interference. There's an opportunity cost for the Conservatives here that I think is really considerable. And having Poilievre in the news, good. Having Michael Cooper with this big Dahmer energy is not really the same. It's just, who do you want to have in the window and what do you want to have in the window?
Did you say Dahmer energy?
Yeah, he's got big Dahmer energy. the guy with a freezer full of human ears kind of energy.
Jordan, you got anything on Telford, or should we move on?
Well, I was just contemplating whether that was a better analogy or crypt keeper. We could. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add on Telford. I think she did a good job. I think, in a way, to me, that begged the question of why they fought so hard to prevent her from testifying, because she was fine. And there wasn't a great clip out of there that the Conservatives could use. I don't think it was damaging to the government. I do think it did underline the limits of the process that they have chosen, the rapporteur process, followed by probably a public inquiry.
Come on, special rapporteur.
Yeah,
it's not not an ordinary rapporteur,
special.
not a run-of-the-mill rapporteur.
That's right.
Not according to Poilievre, because that was addressed, dear rapporteur.
Yeah.
The air quote rapporteur. Yeah. So, I think, to me, when I look at that, I think that there's limits to what she can say. So the functionality of her appearance isn't entirely there for the government. They're going to look a little bit obstructive no matter what, because she can't speak to a number of topics. It also, to me, opens the question of, if they really didn't want her to testify, we also didn't have the PM exactly volunteering to take responsibility to testify either, right? So I think that there's a bit of challenge there for the government story about who's in charge, who's responsible, and who's going to be up there answering questions transparently. And to me, a lot of this drives, again, back to the idea that a public inquiry is likely where they're going to need to land. And frankly, it would probably be politically a lot more helpful for them than this mishmash that they've chosen for the moment.
I got a question about that though. I think one of the things, forget all the news stuff because I didn't think there was much news stuff. But one of the takeaways I had about the testimony was, God, it really feels like, to Kory's point, the political life has come out of this story, and that's good for the government. Doesn't mean that there isn't more embarrassment. I mean, last week at the Trudeau Foundation, all that sort of shit, so it caused like a day of irritation. But you're going to have many days of irritation if there's a public inquiry. So at this point,
do you think Scott? Do you think that Global's perceived overreach on Dong has backed people off on this story a little bit?
I don't know. First of all, if you asked anybody in the gallery that, they would say no, right? So they won't respond in the affirmative to that explicit suggestion. But I think that coming as it did, after weeks of coverage and it feeling like there wasn't anything incremental, I think that it was the pin that pricked the balloon. A public inquiry, like if Johnson recommends a public inquiry, there's going to be a public inquiry. If he doesn't recommend a public inquiry, then there's going to be a hell of a grenade explosion about why on earth.
He doesn't have the moral authority not to recommend a public inquiry.
So, at this point, I don't think he has
If
any
he were
choice.
to say the government, there's nothing here that anybody needs to see, he's actually not done the government any favors, even if he does that now.
So what
I think, Scott, just to your point, like the political story that remains is still really a story about the government kind of shielding itself from accountability or not being transparent. And to me, that's actually what the appearance, Telford's appearance, kind of continued to feed that portion of the story.
But my question is, what's going to for the government? A public inquiry feels like it's still inevitable. For the reasons that David's articulated.
Yeah.
And if there's a public inquiry, that's 100 miles of bad road, because that still means there's going to be day-to-day coverage of this thing at some point, and it's going to be able, in a more deliberative way, to look into questions that the committee process is unable to. And I don't know exactly what it produces, but I know I'd rather not have one than have one, and I don't think that one is avoidable at this point. And so they suffered all of that damage, and they're getting it. So it does feel like we're ending up in the worst of all worlds.
I still think there's a much clearer road for the government to go down, and just to keep beating the dead horse I've been talking about for a long time. I'd be going after examples of Chinese interference in other areas. There's some revelations that didn't get a lot of news and coverage around this because of Telford's testimony. But the same guy who was doing the Trudeau Foundation donation gave, an organization gave $800,000 to the U of T and hundreds of thousands more to U of M of University of Montreal. There are a lot of examples of really not good people. The guy who was involved in this donation is very political member of the Communist Party of China. He's like, this is a bad news bear dude, and he's flowering money out.
Bad news panda bear, just to be exact. Boom!
All panda bears are bad news.
Unless they're being cuddled by Stephen Harper, then
no. Let me tell you about those stupid fucking bears that Harper had to cuddle. One of them couldn't come out to the press event when we brought them in because it spent 6 hours on a plane rolling around in its own feces and was literally covered in
bears
shit.
Or political leaders?
Wait, you say caucus members or what?
Harper was not in the cage with the bears. No, these were the bears. There's never been an animal more destined for extinction than the panda bear. You're a bear. You've got big teeth.
Are you sure it wasn't a political statement, Kory?
And you're eating fucking bamboo for 16 hours a day.
Kory, Kory, let me stick with you. Let me stick with you and ask you about something else, which is in your wheelhouse of being attuned to what's happening in Western Canada. Trudeau had a Western swing plan to promote the budget, and he wanted to talk about their plan for clean jobs in the country. But first, when he hit the prairies, the first thing he had to do was clean up Minister Lamette's comments about reviewing the resource jurisdiction over resources of the three prairie provinces, which the provincial premiers out there had jumped on. Big deal or not a big deal out there?
Well, I think it's them. I think it's Western premiers being very sensitive to these issues for reasons that have a lot of historic legitimacy, I think. What do I think happened? I think Lametti, was talking about...
He was pandering. Speaking of pandas, he was pandering to his audience.
He was pandering, but, within the context of First Nations, are they going to open up these issues again? Is legislation that's been ruling the world here on these issues since the 30s going to be revisited? No, I don't think it is. I don't think that's. I think that's a misstep. I think that was not in his talking points or in his speech. I think it is, as you characterized it, pandering. I don't think Lametti is a particularly skilled communicator. I think he comes across as a bit of a smirking, know-it-all. If you want to improve relations in Western Canada, send out Wilkinson. Send out people who aren't going to have that sort of smarmy Central Canadian know-it-all demeanor, because that's part of the whole problem, I think, in terms of comms and positioning of the Liberal Party in Western Canada. So, I think I don't think there is a substantive there. I think it's exactly as you said, pandering. But anyway, he stepped on the boss's message and the boss's trip, and that's never a good thing to do when you're a minister. That always gets you put in the doghouse.
These things live on, eh? These things live on in mythology. This will roll around out there in the mythology. Why should I sell your wheat? The Trudeau Liberals threatened to, remove resource jurisdiction from the provinces.
Well, yeah, it's when you look at how much time and care and energy is spent into hitting the correct tone in Quebec, for instance, not unnecessarily inflaming things or treading on people's toes. I kind of get the feeling that, there's high fives when you go back to the Liberal caucus if you've gone out and been a complete fucking asshole to people in Western Canada. It's like, oh, yeah, that's it. Well done, you guys. There's almost a delight in reveling in it. And I think it's so unhelpful to the Liberal Party themselves and to national unity generally.
I don't think there was any high-fiving over that. Because I think that your first analysis was the correct one, which is that it was it's substantively, it's exaggerated. Yes, he was pandering to his audience, but ultimately the real takeaway is, guys, right? Just transition is the name of the political game out there. So you don't have to skirt it broadly. You have to skirt it broadly, narrowly, everything in between. You have to be very careful. Will your words be taken out of context? Will your intentions be mischaracterized? Of course. So be attentive. Demonstrate the same care and handling that you do around issues in Quebec, as an example. And I just think that's the big takeaway. And you can get mad about how it's being exaggerated and mythologized, but that's not going to get you anywhere if you're the Liberal cabinet.
He thought it was private, right? Because he said, it'll be a little controversial, and he smirked or smiled.
Yeah, of course he smirked, because he's a smirker, and smirkers shouldn't be in the camera generally speaking.
You know what he is? He's a smirker. He's a smirker.
That sounds like a Seinfeldian term.
It's look, if we were doing media training for him, you'd have a shock collar on the guy and hitting the button every time he smirked, because it does not come across well. But, my point being, it's not just the high fives back at the Liberal caucus. Maybe it's not that, but there certainly isn't the same level of getting your ass kicked when you come back if you fuck up in that way. And if somebody, from Western Canada rolled into Quebec this far out from an election and in a politically sensitive area and was that ham-fisted, they'd be read the Riot Act, and their job would be in jeopardy in terms in cabinet. I just don't feel there's the same consequence for being that ham-fisted and unhelpful. It's the purpose.
He should have known that that's just a door you can't open. Yeah. Even in a pander, you got to suck it up and keep that door shut.
What would the equivalent be? It'd be saying we're going to take on on the notwithstanding clause and do that within Quebec, as a throwaway comment or something. Like we're going to change the Constitution or something.
Yeah, we've had some experience with that. I can tell some stories about that one.
but it's just so unhelpful. But moreover, I just think the largest thing going on politically in Alberta right now is the provincial election campaign. Is the purpose of the federal Liberal government to have Danielle Smith reelected, because they're certainly doing everything that they possibly can to have that outcome. I don't see how that's in their political interest.
It's
Obviously,
a deep fake. It's a deep fake.
I'm happy if that's what the outcome is. Like, another conservative provincial government reelected. That's positive from my perspective. What I fail to see is how that's in Trudeau's interest, and why you would let guys like Lametti go out and do shit like that, because the only thing they're doing is putting votes in the ballot box for Danielle Smith.
So, just a few weeks ago, the Auditor General released a report on the status of rural connectivity here in Canada. Spoiler alert for all you curious hurly-burlyites inclined to search it up for yourselves, we could be doing better. We've talked a lot about rural connectivity here on behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS. Of all the providers, they are the leading advocates for our smaller places having access to the digital tools they need to thrive. Not just words. TELUS has the strongest track record of bringing that connectivity to Canada's rural and Indigenous communities. It's a great big country. Somebody's got to connect it. One key finding of the auditor's report, of the $1.5 billion in federal funding from the ISED's Universal Broadband Fund and the CRTC's Broadband Fund to get our rural and remote communities connected, only about 25% has been spent so far. And we need it to flow faster to meet the government's targets of connecting 100% of Canada by 2030. TELUS is already the platinum partner on this file. They've been collaborating with federal and provincial governments, local communities, and Indigenous partners for years now, working with each community to invest in the infrastructure and technology that best suits their needs, bringing it all in on time and on budget. TELUS are keen to up the ante. They're ready to work with all levels of government to identify every opportunity and accelerate the rollout of the funding to help Canada not only meet the 2030 target, but try and beat it. As I said earlier, we're a big country. Somebody's got to connect it. TELUS has proven they're doing exactly that. Go to telus.com/rural to learn more.
I mean,
do you have something to say, Jordan?
Well, I mean, I don't disagree with a lot of what Kory says there. I think that the best thing that the federal Liberals could do for Rachel Notley is to just sort of vanish for a little while, particularly on these issues. But to me, this incident sort of raised two things. Like, first, on the substantive topic itself, resource sharing with Indigenous communities on natural resources, like that's a real thing, and it's a real issue that we should be talking about and we should be figuring out a path on. But this is not how you do it. This is not how you float it, And I think, to me, more than anything else, it just speaks to, I think there's a bit of a gap in coherence on the part of the federal Liberals in how they think about all of these just transition things hanging together. And people still don't, within that caucus, don't have a clear understanding of how to talk about that and how to talk about it in the West and how to talk about it in a way that's not going to dig them into a hole. And that's a problem that actually they could be doing some work on internally to get people to be just a little bit tighter and more cohesive and less likely to stumble into these things. So I mean, to me, more than anything else, like that's just a sign that there's not a clear understanding throughout cabinet of all of the pitfalls of this. Otherwise, they wouldn't, you wouldn't have him speaking like this, right?
Hey, Jordan, can I stick with you? Because the week started with the Trudeau Foundation collapsing. That's how last week started, with the board, with the exception of three, frankly, friends of former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, remaining on the board. The entire board and CEO resigned from the Trudeau Foundation. Now, because of the name, people are never going to believe that there's no association between Justin Trudeau and this foundation. They just aren't. So it feels to me like this is a bit of a thing, and maybe a bigger issue than I thought. Or you're shaking your head. You don't agree?
Well, I think I think it's not helpful for the government, for sure, because of the name association. I don't know how many Canadians paid attention to the nuance of what came out this week. To me, I don't see a lot of signs that this story has taken up sort of new interest in the general public. But I do think that, for me, the biggest political problem of the Trudeau Foundation story this week, which I think we can all say kind of involves the revelation of fairly stunning internal mismanagement. Like, you have somebody roll up with $120,000 check and you don't look into it. It seems pretty astonishing. For all the non-governmental organizations I've been involved with, that certainly would have raised eyebrows. And the fact that when they tried to return the check, it just went into the ether, and that no one twigged to that for several weeks is also pretty alarming. But for me, I think the biggest problem is that what it does is that it brings back the questions around the Johnston appointment yet again because of his ties to the Trudeau Foundation. So we're cycling back again through the story of whether the special rapporteur has a conflict of interest and whether it's a duck on accountability. So to me, I think that's the part that's the least helpful about all of this for the Trudeau government, is because they failed to effectively issue manage that at the outset. Now we're just stuck cycling back through that controversy again every time this comes up.
Well, maybe they need to put a briefcase full of this couple $100,000 in non-sequential unmarked $100 bills and just leave it outside the door of the Chinese embassy in Ottawa and see who comes and picks it up. Maybe that's the correct way of doing it. If you can't return the check, I don't know. The whole thing just looks totally sketchy and is unhelpful.
That briefcase will fix the sketchy thing.
I will let me know when that's happening. If nobody picks it up in the first 4 or 5 seconds, I will take the money as a service to our nation.
I question that not at all. I would say two things. First, I agree with Jordan that the vulnerability here isn't yes, there's a kind of knee-jerk association, Trudeau, so that comes up. But what's the real pain of it politically? It's the implication for 1 month from now when Johnston reports, and what's his real range of options? And because of all this stuff, again, you sort of come to the real politic of it. How can you reach any conclusion other than there needs to be a public inquiry? So, and then that has a forward implication for the government. I obviously the place is.
You don't think the foundation lives on in sort of the social media world as some, in the way
Sure.
that in right-wing circles in the States, the Clinton Foundation became a thing.
It'll have that. It
was a thing. It didn't just seem like a thing. I thank God we're not the United States in the way that works. But if you go into office, 100,000-aire and you come out hundreds of millionaire, and the only thing you've ever done is hold public office, but you've funneled tens of millions of dollars into your foundation, a lot of it from foreign governments. Yeah, it looks fucking suspicious. And and where should we be going with this is not just an inquiry. We should be shutting this shit down. If somebody wants to have a Trudeau Foundation, fine, right? I don't think it looks good, but don't take donations from like the Clintons did from the Saudis, or like the Trudeau Foundation did from the communist Chinese. How is that ever
when they took? To be fair, when they took the donation. When they took the donation, Harper was rolling around in shit with panda bears. So we're using contemporary lens. So
yeah, I also think that really this is more a story about a lack of political maturity and understanding on the part of the people running the Trudeau Foundation than anything else. Like that.
Yep. Ted Johnson.
You can't.
Johnson. It's been around politics longer than I have.
But then how do you explain this?
But that's the problem.
This is
Isn't it?
And questions.
That's the problem.
And Chantal Hébert pointed this out as well this week, is that at the time the donation was made, questions were raised, right? So it wasn't as though there were no outside warning signals that this might be a bad idea, and yet people chose to proceed with it. So, I do have to ask questions about the internal political judgment within the foundation. Maybe it's too many people with strong political backgrounds not being able to see the forest for the trees.
Can I link the last two subjects together, like the Lametti thing and the discipline, like just Kory's saying, if this was Quebec, and then you take a look at this, and it's the foundation, and what's the discipline with which it conducted itself and the discipline with which the issue was managed. I mean, the problem for the Prime Minister's office is because they are genuinely removed from the Trudeau Foundation, they can't be calling in there and saying, hey, assholes, here's the 4 things you need to do in the exact order in which they need to be done.
And by the way, don't call in the Auditor General, whatever you do.
And don't call in the Auditor General.
Call in the Auditor General. Jesus.
Great, thanks. Let's make news, and we're by definition a function of government. But to me, it speaks to that broader issue of discipline. And just to pick up on, I want to go back to Kory's point in just a minute. And I know I'm going to sound like an old timer again. It's boy, the way Glenn Miller played. But during the Chrétien years, I can remember in particular, there would be provincial elections in the province of Quebec, and there would be legitimate issues of protocol that would be raised at chiefs of staff and communications directors meetings, right? And it'd be this is where we drive. This is where we don't drive. This is what the extraordinary screen on press releases that may have a Quebec polish. This is what it is not. And I think, with this, anything is in the orbit of this whole, Chinese interference issue, anything that's in the orbit of the Alberta election needs to be protocoled in the same way. And I'm sure they're making efforts to do that, but when Lametti can say, let me raise this issue about, provincial authority from 1930, I'm not going to touch it, but let's talk about it. It's just fuck, man, come on, don't.
That's why it's a team sport.
Yeah.
So, like the fabled hammer hunting for a nail, the federal government is determined to fix something that isn't broken: Canada's rail cargo system. In the recent budget, Ottawa signaled it intends to resurrect a failed policy called extended interswitching. Effectively, it would force railways to pass off cargo to each other back and forth from origin to destination. This is being presented as a fix for our supply chains and increased resiliency. It's neither, and it is worse. Think of it this way. Say the government were to tell the airlines that from now on, instead of flying directly between 2 cities, passengers could force one airline to deliver them to a competitor and then switch back again at another airport somewhere en route, at the airline's expense. Contemplate what that would do to the air travel system. It's no different for rail. Imposing such a policy on Canada's railways would actually clog our supply chains. It would slow down cargo and discourage investment. What company in its right mind would spend money to grow knowing it will be forced to deliver business to a competitor? To be clear, this policy will cause Canadians to pay more for virtually everything that moves by rail. And everything does move by rail at some point. Anyway, for heaven's sake, market forces are performing well, especially compared to overseas supply chains. Our sponsor, CN, set multiple records this past fall and winter for moving grain out of Western Canada. Competition between railways is intense, and rail cargo rates in Canada are among the lowest in the world. Why the government is keen to impose extended interswitching is baffling. Canadians are already struggling with inflation. Do we want even higher prices and longer back orders in stores? There was a time, some of us will remember, when CN was a crown corporation and the government ran the railroad. Every year it lost money and had to be propped up by taxpayers. That has not been the case for years. Government should govern, let modern railroaders do what they do best: move cargo safely and smoothly and efficiently. Still comes down to the top guy, and we saw a real glimpse of the top guy this past week when he was confronted by a kid with a video camera that wanted to talk about a woman's right to choose. Jordan, you described this as a Rorschach test. What did you mean?
Well, I think people see in it what they want to see to reinforce their views of the Prime Minister. And so if you're inclined to like Trudeau, I think you see him articulately and passionately breaking down an anti-choice argument and putting this super annoying and entitled white dude kid in his place, which I think many of us, find some reflexive satisfaction in, because particular women, we've all dealt with his type before. But if you're more critical of the Prime Minister, I think what you see in this interaction is some of the arrogance, some of the desire just to win the argument in a pithy way, in a bit of the condescension and the disconnect that has been a vulnerability for him. And I mean, I have to say on my end, like, am I happy that there's a prime minister who is pro-choice to the point that he's not going to let some dweeb from the campus PPC club spout nonsense about women's right to choose? Yeah, sure. Did I like the interaction? No, I didn't. I didn't think it put the prime minister in a great light. I didn't think the tone was good. I didn't think he's not persuading anybody outside of his own base and his own circle about his rightness on these issues. And I worry too that just the tone and the condescension actually feeds some of the fringe crazy on this. So that was my thought, is that really, like, when you see this interaction and you read it, you're going to see more of what you already believe about the PM, and myself included in that.
Scott, did you think it was wise of him to bite on that exchange? I mean, it created a viral clip. I think that a lot of people have watched that exchange on YouTube and on other social media. So it was a viral clip, and the Prime Minister was arguing a point that he wants to talk about, that he believes in strongly, and can argue persuasively, as it turns out. Was he wise to take it on?
I think so. I like Jordan's analysis. I think it's very thoughtful and very true. That being said, I think if you look, I think there's been an accumulation of individual moments which in and of themselves might not be wondrous, because you can look at that clip and see a couple different things. You can look at clips of the Prime Minister responding to questions about the Trudeau Foundation and say, he's looking thin-skinned, he's looking angry. But I think if you take a step back, you say, like, okay, he's out of Ottawa. He's actually getting knocked around a little bit. He's getting engaged. He's starting to show fire. Now, do they need to turn the dial slightly and, adjust? Yeah, absolutely. So that the condescension and the, wait a second, don't you think what I think, because what I think is right, and therefore you would be wrong. They got to rough that out. But like that sense of, Jesus H, fuck, I'm getting my blood up for the fights that are happening and the fights that lie ahead. Like, again, to me, it's all evidence of this isn't a guy who's going to retire before the campaign. This is not a guy who's going to walk off the stage. He's going to be in the next election. And I see this is spring training. And I don't mean the town halls and all that kind of stuff, because I'm not a big believer in that. But just getting out, getting challenged, starting to like engage and having to talk to people in the way that real people talk, and getting the fire, getting the stride, getting the fight. I kind of like it as a Liberal. You're going to get, like you do in spring training, you're going to get some strikeouts at the plate and you're going to get some foul balls. But I see an athlete who's starting to put himself back into shape, and I like the thought of that.
Hey, Kory, what do you think about that?
I don't disagree with a lot of what's being said. I just point out that I don't think it's becoming when a party leader is in any kind of an interaction with somebody who's in a much lesser station, younger, et cetera, et cetera. There's a bit of a punching down aspect to that kind of stuff that is. It makes you look more like a bully. It's sort of the worst parts of that interaction in terms of tone. It's a multiplier effect on it because of who you're doing it with. Like, he's not like having an argument with Poilievre or somebody from the political world like Smith, or someone who, there's lots of people out there who would have that argument or a similar version of it with him, where the stature differential would be less jarring. And so, like, it's if you get into the ring as a heavyweight with like a 98-pound weakling and you beat the shit out of him, like what have you proven except that you're a fucking bully? Like, I just think it doesn't look good. And people who get off on watching a politician of 50 something beating up on a 22-year-old with a mobile phone, then maybe you need to prey on that a little bit too, because you're a little fucked in the head if you're getting off on that.
Hey, why do the Liberals think that abortion's going to be a wedge issue for them in this campaign? Isn't Poilievre decidedly pro-choice?
I think he needs to flirt with being less than that in order to hold some of his folks from the PPC.
Oh, I don't think that's true. Like PPC voters are not. PPC voters for the most part are libertarians. They're not. There's not a huge. It's not the Christian Heritage Party where you've got a bunch of social conservatives. They're actually more of the privatize the sidewalks crowd, and combined with the placenta eaters from the far left. So it's an oddball mix. But
every time the government's in trouble, they throw abortion into the mix.
Yeah,
it's still been the way forever.
I know it has, but what makes them think it still works now?
Because it mobilizes suburban women.
Well, you want to talk
it helps.
about...
It helps with NDP Liberal crossers, right? I mean, that viral video, you may have thought that he was beating up on that kid, but I think there's a lot of natural NDP supporters who go, I can vote for this guy. Like, at least he's standing up against this incel horse shit. So good. So I think that, and I think abortion's an extension of it. Plus, there are lots of, forget the libertarian elements of the PPC. I think there's people in Poilievre's caucus who have trouble laying off the abortion pitch. And so I think every once in a while they say, let's throw one at 75 miles an hour across the plate and see if one of these dummies takes a swing.
And I think also that like Stephen Harper, it's smart for conservative leaders to allow a small space where they turn a blind eye to a little bit of that flirtation, because that keeps parts of the conservative base engaged that they need to have engaged.
If you want to talk about where the Conservative Party makes money, we're going to talk about this in a little bit around the CBC. It's gun control, it's defund the CBC, it was the wheat board when it was still around, it's issues like that. I have never seen a fundraising email go out from the Conservative Party in all my years of being involved around the abortion issue.
No, but not as a fundraiser.
Not whenever. Well, okay, but we're talking about what do you use to mobilize the base and get volunteers. I have seen
that's interesting. I wouldn't be sure you raise money off it.
No, dozens and dozens and dozens of examples of us throwing out hardcore pro-life candidates, and when I say dozens and dozens and dozens, dozens and dozens and dozens every electoral cycle. So I think the politics of this for conservatives is really straightforward. You'll see some of that in nomination battles. You'll see some of that pandering in leadership races, but even that it'll be very slight. And you'll see none of it in terms of a general election. You'll see suppression of folks with those views because the polling on it is just so overwhelmingly negative for those who are advocating hardcore pro-life positions. All of us, the swing voters that we're looking for in suburban Ontario, that we're fighting to get the votes of, are animated by the abortion issue, just in the opposite direction. I'm
loving watching the Republicans squirm on this in the United States. They are in so much trouble on this issue in the United States.
And that's the U.S. And that's in the U.S. where this issue is much less one-sided.
All right, let's quickly move out to Alberta and just get a quick read on what's going on out there in the provincial election. Lisa Johnson from the Edmonton Journal told us this past week that Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is doubling down on her refusal to allow journalists to ask follow-up questions. Despite criticism, she is dodging accountability. In the last edition of her Chorus radio call-in show before the election writ is expected to be issued May 1st, Smith said that the move is an effort to hear from more media outlets. If everyone was asking 2 questions, it would mean we'd have fewer that we'd be able to get to because of time. Saturday's comments follow Smith's declaration that she won't answer any questions about her contact with justice officials and a Calgary street pastor facing criminal charges. She said responses on that topic would be inappropriate while the province's ethics commissioner is investigating whether there was any interference in the administration of justice. Leaders take questions. It's part of the job, NDP leader Rachel Notley said on social media. So, my takeaway from all this is, Kory, you've talked to us about how there's a smart, competent team of people out there now managing the campaign and that they seem to have righted the ship, but they're afraid of her, those people. And they're afraid of that she's going to blow up their carefully constructed scripts every time she steps in front of a mic. And they want her answering as few questions as possible, which is slightly problematic because they actually have to go out and win Calgary. They can't hide and win this election. They got to go out and win Calgary.
Well, but how do you win? Like, it's not by having endless back and forth with the media that's 99% hostile to you. Like, this is just smart political management. And they should have done it a lot sooner. In fact, the fact that she's still doing a call-in show is the fucking stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, that's my question.
Like, why would you do that? Like she, there are countless examples of that, being the cause of her stepping on her own message and on their own campaign narrative. So, there are a lot of dumb notions floating around Alberta politics around media management and campaign management. I think those are being tamped down pretty systematically by Steve Outhouse and some of the other folks who are out there now. And I think this is just another example of them, imposing some discipline and some order and some typical good campaign management practices. There isn't a campaign out there that allows unlimited media questions, especially, maybe in the NDP where they lose, but not in like disciplined professional
Pretty sure Notley's not going to be limiting them.
But like the media out there act like they're her fucking comms team. So it's not.
No, but Smith's problem isn't the media. Wait a second, Kory.
Yeah,
Smith's
Danielle's problem is what she says.
No, she's her problem.
Well, no, it's a combination of the two. It's not untypical for conservatives to have a tougher time with the media and the press gallery, no matter which province you're in, than liberals and others. But like, that's typical.
That's
cry me a fucking river. Don't peddle bullshit.
I'm chuckling because this is loser talk, and I recognize it well. Like,
no, you don't have to have the media on your side in order to win. But there is, especially in Alberta, because of the long period of political hegemony on the right, where the media viewed their job as being the opposition party, and there's the media in Alberta is very hostile to Smith. You can see it in all of the coverage. That's not untypical. So as a campaign professional, what do? You try to limit those interactions. You try to put some guardrails around that. And especially when you have a candidate who's used to being a talk radio host and just, answering whatever comes up and saying whatever, giving your hot take on every issue. Like, if you want to be a successful candidate, it is a zero hot take zone.
But we pissed all over Lametti for 5 minutes for pandering in a room to some people about something. And, on this calling prosecutors thing, she was either the worst pander, flat out lying to this pastor that she was talking to, or she was engaged in a resignable offense. And her handling of this issue has been as brutal as possible. She has a different answer every time, which is why they've now said she won't say anything more about it because we can't control what the fuck she's going to say.
Well, but yes, like both these things can be true. It's both smart, it can be very
and necessary.
It can be very poorly managed and of her own making and pandering. And yes, it can also then be very true that it is smart to limit your media interactions and that the press gallery's hostile to you. Like,
Kory gets the award for most agile yoga this morning.
I see no contradiction between these things.
Yeah.
So these last couple of years, there was this thing we couldn't stop talking about. A thing that was materially affecting how we lived our lives. Supply chains. Come on, it was on your lips nearly every day. Today, that thing is inflation. The two are linked. Choked supply chains aren't the only cause of inflation, but they're a factor. The result? That sick feeling when we look at the price of fruit or fish or the cost of supplies to run our businesses. So we need to take advantage of every opportunity to stabilize costs and create greater affordability for Canadians. One big opportunity is Roberts Bank Terminal 2, the new shipping container terminal proposed for the Port of Vancouver. Our sponsor, the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority, has the right plan for building it. It's a critical link for Canada's supply chains because, 1, we desperately need more container capacity so our trade goods move as efficiently as possible, and 2, because it'll bring healthy competition to the Pacific Gateway. Competition, as you know, typically spurs competitive pricing. More choice, more terminal operators, create more options for businesses to help lower the cost of products Canadians rely on. Lower costs. How badly do we need that, eh? Not just now, but always. Why is the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority the one to do it? They have a proven track record of building sustainable infrastructure projects, and they're a trusted partner of government, business, Indigenous groups, and local communities to get the job done. All right, we got a few minutes left.
Hey, hang on. I want to hammer on this one more thing. I want to say,
okay.
I want to, because I want to.
Picture's very dark. I'm almost losing you there. Like you're.
Well, it's not. It's got nothing to do with the camera. It's just mood. I want to say something, and it's about us. It's about those of us who are on the podcast, and it's about those of us who listen to the podcast, about the whole sort of whore class of professional political management folk, right? Because, I think this actually brings up something. So I have a fundamentally contradictory, divided right down the middle of me view on this issue. So I agree entirely with Kory. Right? I believe that she cannot be controlled, that she's her own worst enemy, and therefore limiting questions is the only rational campaign management decision to make. And as a professional, I applaud it and think that it's insane that they haven't done more of this earlier. And by the way, just a tweak on it, right? It's a it isn't just limit the number of questions. It's eliminate follow-ups, which, like you think about it, the perversity of what's happening in an election campaign environment. First of all, they're doing it in advance of the campaign, which makes sense. So force them to swallow the pill before the campaign. So it's not the first 3 days of media bitching about it. So you eliminate that phenomenon. Second of all, when you eliminate the follow-up question, what it does is it means you can't burn a question. So the dynamic of it is it's going to really radically reduce the number of questions that are asked in campaign around this issue with a phone call. Because if I'm a journalist and I know that I'm only going to get one question, I can't have a follow-up where I switch tracks and ask about something else. I can't get her on the record saying I just wish to refuse it again and then go to something else that's the topic of the day. It means I can't blow my question on the answer that I know she's not going to provide and on the question that I know she's not going to address. So it's going to have a cultural effect of shifting it. So it's smart. Now, all that being said, I really do think this is the kind of issue that reminds us all that someone ought to dig a hole in the ground and line it with hot coals. Throw all of us in it, the whole whore class of us professional political management types, and then seal the hole up and let us burn and roast to death, because this is fundamentally bad for democracy. Eroding ability to hold political leaders to account increases their laziness, their inclination to make shit decisions. It eliminates challenge and contest, and it leads to nothing good. And it is bad. And we are part of the problem because we all intellectually, cerebrally, professionally applaud this decision as rational, but it's wrong.
And also, if she's still got the radio show, it's not going to solve the problem. That's my other take.
Well, let's shut down the radio show too. But Scott, I hope all the liberals out there take your high-minded ideological advice. I'm going to go with the conservatives. We're going to do it the other way, and we'll just win more elections. And I'm very in favor of that outcome. So.
Yeah, you know how all political news stories they find like a political scientist who doesn't know anything about politics to comment on the thing. Scott's our political scientist today.
I'm not saying that I'm not going to continue to be a complete slut. I'm just saying that it's awful.
I'm saying that even if it's the right call, I like the contrast for Notley in this, that she'll go out there and she'll do 85 rounds and it'll all sound reasonable and good. So I think this is all to the good for Notley, because quite frankly, Smith is still going to find outlets and ways to say kooky things. So I think +1 to the NDP on this decision, and good luck to Smith's team. They're going to need it.
All right, let's spend 10 minutes on Poilievre, because it's fascinating me more and more. Kory and Scott, I heard you two on Question Period yesterday. You were very good, by the way.
Thank you.
I heard you say that both of you agreed that Poilievre really should be sticking to the meat and potatoes of political issues right now, that the economy is a big, big issue for people, and he's got a good storyline on that, and he should be driving that storyline. And I agree with that. That seems like obvious political advice. But we know, and we should acknowledge that that Poilievre and the people around him are smart people. And they're not doing anything accidentally. They're doing everything deliberately. So when I see the letter written to David Johnston that is intentionally snarky, when I see ramped up attacks on not just the CBC, but Canadian press, so it's extending, and it's been global news before, so it's extending to all media. And when I see long-form videos, like I watched one yesterday, 5 minutes long, about Churchill and the wisdom of the common people and how we're going to bring, it's a 5-minute video, but I think a lot of people are going to watch it nonetheless. It feels to me like he is not interested in the kind of economic transactional relationship with the voters that you're talking about, and that instead he's trying to build some broader brand, some broader umbrella under which it all fits. And am I right about that? And what is that umbrella?
Well, I think you're right about that. I'm not sure it's an altogether wise or correct as a political strategy, but I think it comes from the leader, and I think it's a view of wanting to lay out a in a way that I think Harper tried to at times, and other conservative leaders have tried to at times, to try to lay out a bit of an ideological framework and a different narrative for the country than what has been the predominantly liberal academic media consensus narrative around the country and what drives it, et cetera. And I think there's some value in doing some of that to an extent. But not at that stuff only matters if you win the fucking election. And to win the election, you're going to have to talk to a lot of voters who are not animated by that shit at all. They don't care. They don't think about it for 1 second of one day of the year, like never. They care about worrying about whether they're going to be able to pay their mortgage, because their mortgage is coming due in a year, and where interest rates are right now, they're not going to be able to. Like that. Those are the things that we need to talk to as political candidates need to speak to, and whoever has the most compelling narrative on that. And you're seeing two very different narratives being fleshed out, trying to address that, trying to be the most credible on these economic and affordability issues. Actually three, because I think there's a distinct one for Singh as well. But that's where the main game is. This other stuff, I think it probably animates Poilievre more personally. I think he's more captivated by it than he should be. And I think it's largely a distraction. Like, I think that's the stuff you work on after you win. And to win, you got to spend time on other stuff. Now, some of these things, like whether it's a fundraising letter on the CBC that generates the media, who cares? That's called narrow casting some messaging, throwing some raw meat to the base in order to have them send you a bunch of $100 checks. That's different, and that's, I think, politically necessary and smart. But there's examples like some of the stuff that was going on around the Chinese interference issue. Whether it's the letter to Johnston or whether it's the obsession with getting Telford before committee, only to have it fizzle and go nowhere. That stuff is a distraction. I don't know why they're doing it.
I think Kory has put the best possible outfit on what's happening, as he should. I have to say, as somebody who has in the past and generally continues to believe that the people around Poilievre are very smart and are doing this strategically as a way to pander to a certain group of the base that they need to hold and then moderate and so on as we go towards the election. I have to say, in the last couple of weeks, my view on this has shifted a little bit. And I think some of this is just self-indulgent wanking on the part of the leader. This is this miracle flight nonsense, this Churchill cosplay, this is self-indulgent crap, and he's doing it because it makes him happy. And I think the nastiness and some of what we're seeing with respect to the attacks on the media and the tone and tenor, of the letter around Johnston for things like that, that's he's getting joy out of just being petty and nasty on that. And I think that's who he is. And that some of this is just him coming out as who he is as a leader. And I think ultimately the thing that's really interesting about it to me is that all of this suggests a very thin skin at the end of the day. And I don't think it's a good look. I think it does distract from the parts of his economic message that are very effective and that are working for him. And I think it makes him look weak. It makes him look out of touch even more. And frankly, when you contrast this to what he does when he goes out and sort of, is fetishizing the working class and the working man and this, that, and the other, it makes him look like a tourist. It makes him look absolutely like he's putting that on and that his real heart is in this other stuff. And I don't think it's smart. So whether they've just turned the dial too much into letting the leader do what he wants over the past couple weeks, or whether this is a broader shift in their strategy, I don't know. But certainly, I don't think it's good. I don't think it's helpful for him.
Scott, who does he want people to think he is?
I don't know, but it's something like Churchill. I agree strongly. Like in Godfather, they meet with Sollozzo. Sonny shoots his mouth off, and afterwards he's scolded by his father. Never let anyone outside of the family know what you're thinking. I think that the Poilievre of these videos and these stunts is letting us know what he thinks, and that is a step toward permitting your opponents to learn how to beat you. And because I agree strongly with both Kory and Jordan. I think there's a lot of vanity and self-indulgence in this. I mean, whether it's the bullshit, thin-skinned, snarky little, one-line note to Johnson, or even more to the point, if it's the kind of, Jordan Peterson with a boner video about like give man wings and he shall fly. It's I'm going to indulge in the creation of myself. And it's so self-aware. It's so I went to grade 7 geography with wingtips and a briefcase, Alex P. Keaton, fucking little young Republican stuff. Like it's nauseating. So do I think it's a mistake because it's abrasive and unserious? Do I think it's a mistake because the media will hate it and the elites will? No, and they'll indulge themselves and they'll say that's why it's great and they love to see this reaction. What's really wrong with it is that it is a peek inside who he really fundamentally is, and you can therefore tempt this guy into fights that are unwise based on his ego and his self-indulgent nature. These videos, I am unconvinced are about anything other than him getting a load of himself. It is flexing in a mirror. And I don't think that's something when you're an opposition politician you should be in the business of doing. You want to win votes.
All right. With that, Gordon Pinson, bring us home.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Actually, that's a Poilievre slogan, isn't it? Let's bring it home, Gordon. All right, who's got a Hey You?
I got one, real quick. I won't go into why, but it's a significant day for a very important friend of ours, Jenny Byrne. So my Hey You goes out to Jenny. I'll say nothing more about it, but we're thinking of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Jordan.
I got a Hey You. I got a friend of mine. It's a significant day for her right at this very moment. Hey You going out to Olivia Chow. Second time was the charm for John Tory. Maybe will be for you too. Going to be a formidable candidate and wishing you all the best.
There you go. Kory?
Well, I'm going to build on part of what we were talking about earlier. I'm going to throw another Hey You out to Steve Outhouse. Keep bringing the discipline to the Smith campaign. I think you're going to get some criticism for some of this stuff, but fuck all that. Don't listen to Scott. Listen to me, and practice good campaign communications and media management. Lock it down.
And we'll light our cigarettes on the ashes of democracy in the years to come, everyone.
Hell yeah.
Put your conscience in a lockbox until the writ's over. My Hey You goes out to Elon Musk. Elon, I was initially angry. When you put the label of government-funded journalism under the CBC. But the more I think about it, the more I think it's a terrific idea. And I think everybody on Twitter should have one statement under their name placed there by you at the advice of people on Twitter that qualifies that person's interventions. Like, just for instance, you could say National Post laid off 90% of their reporters over the last 10 years. You could say Andrew Scheer found guilty of fraud by his own party. Like these kind of qualifiers under everybody, I think it's interesting. Find one fact and put it out there and define everybody. That's if you're going to do this, that's where it fucking ends. Because you are been used as a tool on things like the CBC and the BBC. Anyway, that's my Hey You. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS. I'd like to thank our sponsor, CN, and the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. You guys for being here. It was a load of laughs and insight, as it always is. And everybody who watched or listened. Come back next week for more Cursed Politics.